Thank you. Thank you for your presentations. And just to say, I think that there's great similarity between all of the presentations, a lot of repetition, which I suppose is reflective of the nature of the business that you're all engaged in. But I can't help this bit of irony and just to remind you that over the years that our working lives have changed and work practices have changed. There's always been objections from the employers to benefits that might accrue to workers. When a bill or an attempt at legislation is brought forward that might improve the lot of workers, the employers are always throwing their toys out of the pram. I was looking at the debates in 1833 in Britain when the Factories Act was being implemented to stop and limit child labour. There was similar arguments being brought forward by the employers then that this would make life impossible, that they couldn't hear because it would ruin employment, it would ruin competitiveness and decimate profits. Now, I don't want to compare any of you guys with the terrible employers of the post-industrial revolution era that stuck children up chimneys and into factories. But nevertheless, there is a pattern that when a piece of legislation that benefits workers is brought forward, employers tend to complain very bitterly. And I just want to take to task some of the facts from the presentations. First of all, I think it's wrong to say that there's no evidence that there's a connection between low pay and low hours. There's lots of evidence out there. There's studies from the CSO, there's evidence from TASC, there's evidence from Social Justice Ireland. There's lots of evidence out there that there's a direct link between low income and low level of hours. And I'd like to quote to you from a Dunnes Stores worker who gave us when we had a briefing last year when the bill was put before the Dáil. And by the way, in some ways I don't think the bill goes far enough. I welcome it very much, but I don't think it goes far enough. And she talks about their lives and how they work. 3 out of every 4 of the 10,000 Dunnes Stores workers are employed in what they call flexi-hour contracts with a minimum of 15 hours per week. Despite this, most of us work above that. Some of us work 25 or 35 hours, some work less. But the average hours between 25 and 30. All we want is a new contract that reflects the hours we actually work so that we can have an income we can depend on from week to week. Our income can fluctuate from 400 one week to 150 the next, entirely at the discretion of the local manager. And this makes it impossible for us and our family to plan our lives. Many of our colleagues have been denied loans with credit unions and mortgages because a bank looks at the amount of money we have, then looks at our contracts and sees how unreliable they are and how low the hours are. And that's just one of many, many people who gave evidence of this. So I think it's ridiculous to say that there's no relationship between low pay and low hours. And there is a worrying prevalence of low pay in this country, quite a shocking prevalence of low pay. I think it's 23 to 24% of the entire workforce are officially deemed as low paid, and we're one of the highest low paid economies in the OECD. And therefore a bill like this is necessary, both to protect the livelihood that people live, the lifestyle they have, but also to protect the income that they can earn. So I would ask you to consider the consequences of doing nothing. I mean, I note that you say that we really need to think about this, and at one point you said that you think that the way we're going about the business here is flawed and leaves a lot to be desired. If you think that, then maybe one or two of you should put yourselves forward for election the next time on the basis that you could do it better. But our business here is to protect workers and to enhance their lives. And at the moment there are hundreds of thousands of workers out there whose lives are being severely impacted on because of antisocial, unsocial and anti-family contracts and hours, and lack of contracts in many cases. In fact, my worry is that those contracts are increasingly becoming more precarious and more difficult. If you look at a company, for example, like Deliveroo, who actually only take workers on the basis of if there's work there, you can have it. Otherwise, you're self-employed. They don't even earn the minimum wage. They're subject to work that they can get from an app. It's extremely competitive. So there's a lot of maybes and nots for workers and families out there. And that is, I'm talking about a quarter of the working population. So it does matter. The data is there to show that there is a relationship between low hours and low pay. And I just would like to ask you all a question. Really and truly, if zero-hour contracts are not that prevalent, and if it's not such a big deal for your industries, then why are you so worried about the impact of creating legislation that will give workers limited access to some kind of contract that will allow them be able to go to a credit union or a bank, or to have some dependability over their working life and the income that they get? Because it strikes me that if on the one hand we're saying no such thing as zero-hour contracts, the study from Limerick is flawed, this is all not true, what's the panic? And I'd like you to try and address that, please.
Thanks, Deputy. And also, you might